All right, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to Tech Thursday. This is our third Tech Thursday. If you were here for the first two, you did see that I did have a co-host for those. However, she's gone back to her regular job, so she's still here with us. So if Kelly's your rep, you're absolutely going to keep dealing with Kelly. However, Tech Thursday is now my baby, so I will be running it. Today, let's go ahead and take a look at our agenda here. We're going to be talking with Tristan. He's one of our guys on the implementation team. In fact, he leads the implementation team. So I would say he would be the guy on the implementation team. We're going to take a look at the virtual cloud failover appliance. So what's the difference between a physical and a virtual appliance? And when would you use which one? And how do you get it? How do you set it up? How do you tune it? And as always, we're going to do our Q&A session at the end. So we'll definitely have some time to look at the answers that you guys have emailed in and talk about those. So I see we've got Tristan on the line. Let's go ahead and jump in there, and we'll start chit-chatting with Tristan. How you doing today?
Good. How you doing, Chris?
I am doing good. So before you jump into your technical stuff, how long have you been here, and what's something you like to do outside of work?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been here at Infoscale for a little over 4 years. I've been involved with implementations since the beginning. And outside of work, it's all about kids, right? Spending time with kids, having fun with them. My kids are an age where we can start doing a lot of things together. So yeah, that's where I spend most of my time outside of work.
So you're in Salt Lake. Do you do a lot of like skiing and desert stuff and Salt Lakey stuff, or?
We've got all kinds of fun activities out here. Mountain biking, skiing, snowboarding in the winter, and hiking, camping, just sitting by a lake and relaxing. All kinds of outdoor activities we like to do.
Excellent, excellent. Do you want to jump in and start covering your couple of topics you wanted to hit? And we actually did get 2 questions emailed in about implementation, so I'll ask you those at the end.
Yeah, definitely. And do you want to, after this, you want to go over live Q&A here with just me? And then we'll do live Q&A with variants as well?
Okay. If any questions drop in, we'll hit them up at the time.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the introductions, yeah, my name is Tristan Heberer. I'm the manager of implementation services here at Infoscale. So today, covering 2 quick topics: implementation process, what that looks like at a high level from start to finish. And then we'll talk about how to schedule time with an implementation specialist. So the process is pretty straightforward. What we try and do is schedule time with either you or your customer and ensure that the appliance or whatever product it is, whatever you've purchased, gets installed, set up correctly. And we also go through tests. So it's not just about helping you install it, but it's about teaching you about the appliance, how to use it, how to manage it, and all that kind of fun stuff. So the process, we break it down into 2 or 3 different phases. So we'll get with you to do some initial setup. We'll install agents if we have to. We'll do all the initial config. After that, after a couple of days go by and you have some good backups, then we can get together again and go through the restore process. So we'll boot machines up on the appliance, we'll boot machines in the cloud, whatever you need, and start to finish, restore. We can restore back to physical if we need to. We want to do that in the process with you, just so you become confident in the solution, but also know how to use and manage the solution. And then after that, there's a handoff to support. So we'll talk to you about our support group and how to get in touch with them, how to submit a ticket, and so on.
So is that typically like a couple of meetings, like 2, 1, 3, 4?
It all depends, right? Typically it's 2 meetings, but if that's not enough, we can do up to 3 or up to 4 meetings. Really, whatever it takes to get the solution to where you want it to be confident when that customer calls you to have to do a restore or boot a machine up.
Excellent. Now, on the cloud side, does that include like the DR testing stuff, or is that extra and beyond?
It does. So that'll include our testing. That'll include any sort of VPN connectivity that may be needed. We do a couple different types of VPN, so it's either one of those. We can also do some public IPs and some port forwards. So it's whatever you need to fail over correctly in terms of how you access that secondary.
And
but yeah,
I
we do
only
go all
asked
through
that
in the process.
Because last week we had support on, and support was like, oh, well, you definitely need to be doing tests. So, I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that you guys will help them set up that side so they'll be able to test this on their own. And definitely, doing regular tests is very important. You want to, have faith in your disaster recovery solution.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, we go through the first test and all the training together in the beginning. And then after that, yeah, we rely on you to do your own self-test, whether it be quarterly, monthly, whatever it may be. But to your point, yes, we definitely emphasize testing.
Excellent. So on to your second point, how do we schedule time with you?
Yeah, good question. So after your deal is closed, your appliance will then ship out, and usually it's a number of days. When the appliance ships out, you're going to get an automatic email. And it's going to be, it's a automatically generated email from our system. And what happens is it's got a lot of information, so there's a lot to look at. But it'll give you some initial, best practices, initial setup steps, everything you need essentially to get to the point of having the appliance online on your network and ready to communicate with us. So once you get that email, it's just easy as responding to that email. That'll go to one of our implementation specialists to get like a bookings calendar or some sort of automated way to schedule things. Oops, sorry about that. You'll get an automatic way to schedule things, and once you respond to that, we'll reach back out again. If for any reason you're not getting that email, or a couple weeks go by, you can email support@infoscale.com, and that'll get routed to the right person.
And they can also reach out to their sales rep or any of the pre-sales personnel, and we can also help make sure that there wasn't someone who fat-fingered an email address or something silly like that.
Yeah, the biggest errors we see with people not receiving that initial email is that we have like the primary tech contact wrong. So like we're emailing your CEO and not the guy who's on the ground doing the implementation, or it goes to your junk or spam email. I mean, it's an automatically generated email, so some systems can detect that as spammy.
Okay, yeah. So our automated system might fake that it's from us or whatever and go into that spam box.
Yep. So something to look out for there too.
Excellent. So are there any other tips you have for kind of making sure that you have the best experience with the implementation team?
Just communicate, right? It's all about getting some time with us scheduled. It's better to do the implementations one-on-one as opposed to emailing back and forth trying to solve a problem or, do an initial setup. So, it's a free offering from Infoscale. It's not just for new customers. It's for existing customers. It's for any appliance that you purchase and gets sent to you. You get the ability to work with an implementation specialist. So use that, right? It's super helpful.
Excellent. So we've got the pre-sales team to help you with proof of concepts and stuff like that. We've got the implementation team to help you with actually doing the deployment, and then they're going to hand it off to the support team to help you keep that and maintain it and make sure your customer has a great experience.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that information, Tristan.
Very well.
So I do have one extra thing I'm going to throw in here. I was looking at what we were sending out to our partners here, and in the letters from the CEO's desk, we did send out pictures of a bunch of our home offices. And I only bring this up because mine's the top right one, and I think that's amusing. So you can see there, I've got my lighting here, I've got my screens. If you look to the lower left, you can see I have my cloud jacket. So I actually do have a cloud suit that I had because we did an event on Halloween one year. So that was pretty fun. So I did want to bring that up. And then now we'll go ahead and jump into the virtual appliance. What is it? Why do we use it? Why would we deploy it over a physical one? What's the best way to test out something, right? So 8.0 is coming out, or it's kind of halfway out now. We're rolling it out to customers. It'll be fully out by, I think, the 4th or the 5th of this next month coming up here. So if you wanted to test that, well, you could definitely ask for a virtual appliance. How do you ask for that? What's the right way to kick the tires on the latest and greatest? Well, you want to reach out to your sales rep. Now, if you already have a dashboard account, you can go in and download it that way, but you want to make sure that you ask your sales rep first for the eval to make sure that we give you that eval space. If we see you just starting to use up more space, we're going to think you've deployed that to a customer, and we're probably going to call you and say, hey, you guys are over. So definitely reach out to your partner success manager first. Reach out to your field person, whoever you're buying InfraScale from, and make sure that you get that evaluation for that virtual appliance. Now, when you reach out for that virtual appliance, you're going to get an email that welcomes you. It's going to show you a picture of what that virtual appliance, or it's going to give you links to download it. It's going to give you a license key to be able to enable it. So you don't have to be an existing partner necessarily to be able to deploy the virtual appliance. You don't need a dashboard ahead of time. There is a license key that will give you 30 days to be able to work with that virtual appliance. Now let's go ahead and take a look at what it's like to deploy that virtual appliance. Now, I think we're all pretty familiar with VMware. So right here we can see, here's a VMware. So this is a super server from InfraScale. It's got a good amount of RAM, some storage. So here, when we send it out, it's an OVA. So you're going to download that OVA, and you're simply going to tell it that you want to deploy that OVA. Now with that, you're just going to have to give it a name. And then along with that, you're also going to tell it where you want to deploy it to. So here, I'm going to put it on my biggest storage disk. Now it is going to deploy 3 disks, and we'll talk about that in a second. We're going to agree to the terms and conditions. And then we're going to deploy it to the default network. And we can't put additional networks on there if we need. And I'm going to deploy it as thin. And I'm not going to auto boot it. There's a reason for that. Now here we can see that it's being deployed. It's rolling it out. We're good to go. Now let's go ahead and jump over here and take a look at the next step. So here, this is our Tech Thursday virtual appliance. We're going to come in here and we're going to say we want to edit the settings. Now there's some very important things that we need to do at this point. If we want to be able to boot, so nested boot on top of this machine, then we're going to have to come in here and we're going to have to open up CPU. We're going to have to expose hardware-assisted virtualization to the guest OS. Now again, let's go back into settings. We can see here that we have 3 disks that are already deployed for this machine. Now when we recommend this, and when you get that welcome email that gives you the download link, there's a PDF to download that's going to tell you, what are the recommended configurations? How should you set this up? Within that, it's going to recommend these. Now, it recommends in vCenter how to move those disks around. Now, what if you don't have vCenter, right? What if you're just running regular VMware? Well, I'm going to show you the alternate way here. If you want to do it the default way, it's in that guide. But here, we want to take a look at these and say, all right, well, here's how much RAM we have. I'm going to switch this to gigabytes. I'll give it 32 gigs. So the more RAM I give it, the better. We can come in here and look. All right, so here's our hard disk 1. It's a terabyte. Or it's almost 2 terabytes. Now that's going to my RAID disk, and that's perfectly fine. Here we can see we've got a tiny disk. This is going to be our boot disk, right? That 14 gig disk or 15 gig disk. That's our boot disk, and we can leave that on top of the RAID also, or we could move it to the SSDs. Now this is the important one. With this particular hard disk, which is our catalog disk, which is 180 gigabytes, we're going to want to make sure that's on SSD. So if we're using non-vCenter and we can't just migrate it, I'm going to go ahead and delete it. Then up here, I'm going to add a hard disk. I'm going to add a new standard. Now when I go look at this hard disk, I'm going to browse, and I'm going to go ahead and put it on one of my SSDs. Now I'm going to keep it the same size that we had before. So if we see here, it's 180 gigs. So I'm going to make that 180 gigabytes. And then I'm going to thick provision it. Now, the reason why we're going to thick provision it is this disk is actually for our catalog volume. So we want to make sure that we're not clearing the space. It doesn't get fragmented. We want a solid chunk of space. So we're going to thick provision that one. Now when we hit OK, it's going to go ahead and start reconfiguring that VM. It's going to thick provision that disk for us. It's going to change the RAM, the hardware virtualization. So now we're all good on top of this VM. Now let's go ahead and boot it up here. Now what this is going to do is it's going to boot up this virtual machine. Again, ahead of time we pre-configured how much RAM we wanted to give it, how many CPU cores we wanted to give it, where the disks are. Now an important thing to think about here is, I have a lot of people who are like, oh, well I have this old piece of hardware laying in the corner. Why don't I use that and use that to do all my backups? Well, for traditional backup, that might have been a valid option. I mean, it's going to be slow and not preferred, but you really want to make sure that you're giving it a good amount of resources. If you're planning on booting on it and doing that nested virtualization, and you're planning on making things performant, you want to make sure it's got gigabit Ethernet, right? 100 megabit is super slow. Ideally, it'd have 10 gigabit if your environment supports it. Now, another thing is we definitely want to make sure that we're doing SSDs for that catalog volume. And here, let's go ahead and we'll take a look at, we can see here, we want to go to 251. That's where it's at, so let's go ahead and jump there real quick. All right, so we've hit that appliance. Go ahead and log into it here. Is that the one I just deployed? Hold on one second. Oh. Oh, there we go. All right, good. So it's letting me in now. So here what we can see is the first step it's going to do is it's going to go out and scan those disks. And it's going to come back and it's going to show us what disks are available. Now again, this is that important part I was just talking about, where we want to make sure that our catalog is on very fast disks, where our regular storage can be on, spinning disks that are rated or have some kind of redundancy. So this first disk we can see up here, we can see our read and write speed. And we're going to go ahead and move that over. That's our 1.8 terabytes. Then we're going to move over our faster performing disk down here over to being our catalog disk. So that's a 2 gigabit speed read, and that one's a 1.16. So that's going to, make a big difference. Click next, and here it's just showing us how it's going to provision those disks. We tell it to finish, and now it's going to restart this appliance for us. Now, when we talk about the catalog disk, again, I can't stress this enough. The most important thing is that it's on fast storage. Now, why don't we throw this on NVMe storage? Well, if we look at the mean time between failure on NVMe storage, we're going to actually see that it's not that high. You know, we look at other ones, we're going to see things up at 2 billion, 2 billion writes between meantime failures. When we look at NVMe, it's a lot lower. Another thing that I want to recommend against is when you're going out and you're getting SSD storage, don't buy the most affordable SSD storage, right? That's not what we want to do. If we just go on Newegg or Amazon and we buy that cheapest SSD storage, that mean time between failures is going to be really low. You know, you want to make sure you get something enterprise class. Now, enterprise class, HP, Intel, Micron. There's a lot of different vendors that sell some pretty high-end enterprise class storage that, you know, has a high mean time between failures and is still within the couple $100 price tag range. So it doesn't necessarily have to be insanely expensive storage. Now, the fact that we've reprovisioned our disks here and we're rebooting, it's going to take a second for this appliance to come back up and online. Now, whenever we see this screen come up, this is the console version of the appliance. So typically, I do everything through the web interface, but say that you deployed this on a machine and it didn't have access to DHCP. Well, then you have to come in here and log in here and give it an IP address manually. Now, if DHCP is out there and it can access DHCP, it's going to automatically do that for you. Now, we can see right here, it's already got an IP address, but down at the bottom, it's still setting up this appliance. Now, you'll always know when your appliance is up and running, whether it's a physical or a virtual, because at the end, it's going to show you, or it's going to say, you're welcome. Once the appliance says you're welcome, that's the moment that you're able to log into that machine. Now, another thing when we talk about like the SSDs and going out and buying them is you don't need to worry about buying the biggest SSD. That's not going to make a huge difference. Actually, when we were provisioning this, I didn't point it out, but there's actually a limit to the size of the catalog volume. So you don't need anything over, you know, on a smaller end, 500 gigs, on a bigger end, a terabyte for those SSDs. If you get something bigger, we're not going to be able to use it. We're not going to be able to provision it. So definitely make sure that you're, you know, getting the most reliable, stable one for your dollar, as opposed to spending money and buying the biggest one that you can get a hold of. Now here, while we're waiting for this machine to go ahead and finish deploying itself, I'll pause and take a look and see if we've got any questions out there and answer any of those questions that we have coming in right now. All right, so one of the questions that popped in there is, do we have to have a licensed copy of VMware to be able to run the virtual appliance on top of it? And the answer for that is no. You don't have to have a licensed copy. You can deploy the appliance on the free version of VMware. Now, if we're backing up VMware, that's kind of a different situation. If we're backing up VMware, then we're only going to be able to use the APIs for change log tracking if it's a licensed copy of VMware. So when we get done with this appliance and we boot it up and I go ahead and set up some backups, that's only going to be that way if you have a licensed copy. If you have an unlicensed copy or the free version of VMware, then you're going to have to deploy the agent out to all of the guest OS, as opposed to being able to just log into the vCenter or ESX host and then check the boxes that you want to back up. So I did get another question here around licensing it. So licensing the virtual appliance, when we're licensing the virtual appliance, we're actually going to license that for how many terabytes we're protecting. So that's a pretty easy way to license it, right? There aren't additional options unless you want to have the disaster recovery be in the InfraScale cloud. Then there is an additional license to be able to have InfraScale be your disaster recovery site. And as Tristan was talking about earlier, that gives you the ability to work with the implementation team and fail over to the InfraScale cloud and boot up there and have the VPNs and all that. Where if you don't go that route and you actually do a virtual appliance in your primary and a virtual appliance in your secondary and replicate between the two, you would have to pay for the terabytes on side A and the terabytes on side B. But you would also have to then configure your own failover scenarios, your own VPNs, and you'd have to manage all of that. Now, for MSPs that want to have multiple customers replicating into their data center, that's a great solution, right? That way they're moving their data into their own data center, and they don't have to rack and stack a physical box for every machine that they have. But we do have some recommendations about that. You couldn't do 100 appliances to one machine. So you definitely want to work with us on making sure that you're following those best practices. Now it says we're welcome. So it looks like we're ready to log back in. Let me go ahead and I'll actually go straight out. So now we can see that we're actually seeing a second login type. Now this login type is going to log us into the dashboard. Now this again is why I said it's very important you talk to your rep. If you go through all these steps and you download it without talking to your rep, and then you deploy it and you start doing some testing, you're going to get a call from the overages people, the people who say, hey, you're using more data than you're licensed for. Where if you reach out to your rep, they're going to put in that eval, and then you're going to get that extra space. So let's go ahead and we can either log in this way and license it into our dashboard. We're going to pick our cloud region. So I'm going to say the US. I'm going to allow it to register my appliance. Now here, we're going to scroll down. We're going to agree to the user license agreement. I am on the East Coast, so this is all good. Now it wants me to set a new password. So instead of that default password this thing had, we'll go ahead and set a new password. Here we're going to give it that system name. So we already gave it a name in the virtual environment, but now we're going to be able to give it a name in that physical or in that name that's going to be showing up on the network. So we'll call it Tech Tuesday. Vert. And we'll leave it in the local domain. That's fine. Here, it's going to say, all right, well, we're going to be DHCP. Here's our MAC address. Here's all the additional information. If we wanted to go static, which personally I would recommend, if this is an actual deployment, is to go static. But we'll leave it DHCP. And then for our secondary DNS, we'll give it Google's. All right, so it's looking, cloud replication is not configured. I knew that was the case when I set this up. So I put in my email address for alerting. Now it's gone out and it's gone ahead and checked and made sure that This is the latest version of that firmware. So here I can hit apply and reboot. And now it's going to apply all those settings and go ahead and reboot that machine for us. So here on the console, we're going to see that it's going to switch from the "You're welcome" warning to the InfraScale booting up. And it's going to show us that it's now bringing that machine back online for us. Now, instead of watching it restart and all that fun stuff, I'm going to go ahead and bring up docs.infrascale.com. So if you were in the last webinar or the one before that, I talked about this. Probably going to talk about it on every webinar. So this is probably one of the most useful tools that's out there for you guys. You've got any of your disaster recovery, so everything we're looking at. So say we wanted to look at the physical appliances versus the virtual ones. We can come in here and we can see, here's all our current shipping models. We can see, all right, well, here's all the upgrades. Here's the support for virtualization. Here's the support for security, encryption, hypervisors, databases. Like literally everything you would want to know, you can find here. Here's all the deployment guides on how to roll it out and deploy the software. And again, this is for all the different software that InfraScale offers. So whether it's disaster recovery we're talking about today, it's direct to cloud, or it's cloud application backup, all of that information's in here and ready for your consumption. Now here we can see it's coming back up and it's booting. While that's coming back up, I do have a fun announcement. InfraScale Cloud Application Backup, so ICAB, as we call it for short, is actually out there. We are actually doing some updates to the way that we charge for it and the way that we bill for it. So we're moving from a year-long commitment where you buy pre-allocated space over to the ability to do it on a consumption basis. So that's awesome. You know, that's something a lot of partners and customers have been asking for is, hey, can we do this on consumption so we pay for what we use? And absolutely, in the next month, that is something that is coming out from our side of the house. So you'll be able to do consumption-based billing and paying for that. Now, it looks like we've gone ahead and rebooted. So let's hope I just remember that new password I put in there. Oh, I got the password right. So now we're logged in. We're up and running. Over here, we've got all the dashboard widgets. We can add those so we can see all the additional information. Now, right now, we don't have anything backed up. We don't have anything protected. So if we come over here to Clients and we go to the VMware tab, it's probably going to be the easiest one for me to set up real quick. So I'll put in the IP address. I'll put in my username and password for my Office 365. I'm sorry, not Office 365. Eric, you threw me off. I saw your chat. For my VMware host. So here we can see it's connected to my VMware. And now you can see all my servers. By default, I told it not to register them. I could have had to register them all, but I chose not to. But let's go ahead and pick a couple. Here's the most important server ever. We'll register that guy. Maybe we want to back up a Windows 2012, Windows 7. We'll do a Windows 10. And now I can just say register. It's going to register all those machines. So I want to activate that configuration. And now when I come over to Client Summary, I can see that I have all those machines. So here, if I tell it I want to do a manual backup, it'll back that machine up. Now, one thing that I get a lot of calls on is, oh, I went to go back it up and it wouldn't do it. Like manual backup wasn't there. Now, it's already here because I'm on a pretty decent virtual machine. But, you know, if it's not there, just give it a second. It's got to add it into the catalogs and do some other stuff. And it's really going to depend on the speed of the machine that this virtual appliance is running on. Now, once you set that up, there's some other stuff you want to go check out. Under backups right here, you can see Here's my default retention policies. Here's my default job schedules. So you definitely want to check that out and make sure all that's right. Here's where you can see our network adapters and make sure we're running at the right speeds. Network status is going to tell us what's plugged in, what it's detecting, whether it's static or DHCP. Now, something I'm very excited to talk about that's coming the new version of this is if we come down here and we look at boot verification. Well, here I enable boot verification for the entire box. So every machine that's on here is going to follow these same rules for boot verification. Now, with that being said, in the future, in the 8.0 release, we actually configure this per client, and we can enable and disable it per client and set the timing per client. So in 8.0, that's a major improvement. Another major improvement is just all of the false positives for errors that were out there that would eventually go away, but caused a lot of customers to be concerned. A lot of those have been turned back. So while we're in the process of doing things, we're not going to give you an alert that isn't an accurate alert. Now, if we come over here, we'll go ahead and right-click and say we want to do a manual backup. Say we want to do a full backup on this guy. Kick it off. Now, we're going to be able to see that backups are going to show up on this tab, but they're also going to show up on other tabs. And some of the other tabs are a little more useful. So right here, we can see that this is a VM saving disk 1 of 2. Now, if I come up here and go to Jobs, Active Jobs, I'm going to be able to see that jobs here, and it's running the pre-script. If I go into Logs, I can see what's happening with that job. Or my favorite way to watch things is to come over and go to the VMware tab. And then here, if we look at this, we can actually see that it's saving disk 1 sector, and here's our progress bar for what's happening for that particular disk. Now, hopefully that was enough for you guys to get kicked off on deploying the appliance and configuring it. I'm going to go ahead and jump into Q&A here real quick. I see that we've only got about 5 minutes left. So coming back to you from the InfraScale data center here, we'll do some live Q&A and make sure that we are answering all your questions that are out there. So I do see that we have a question around 365 Dynamics. So that's something that I'm definitely going to have to take a look at. I know that it's not currently in the list of supported things, but I'm confident it's on the roadmap. So I can take a look and find out where in the roadmap that is, whether it's going to be months or 6 months until we add in 365 Dynamics support. Sorry, there's a rather long question. Give me 1 second. Okay, so the question is basically around the types of hardware that we support deploying our appliance on top of. As long as VMware or Hyper-V supports your hardware, then that kind of obfuscates that from what we support. So you're going to deploy our virtual appliance into that hypervisor. So there's not going to be, we don't really have an HCL for what hardware we support. We support our physical appliances and then certain virtual environments. And those virtual environments are Hyper-V, VMware, and Nutanix. So as long as it's one of those, they're going to handle the direct interaction with the hardware, and we're going to sit on top of that. Now, it is nested virtualization, but with all modern platforms, CPUs, and RAM, and motherboards, nested virtualization doesn't really cause that big of a performance impact. So booting things on top of the appliance, as long as you have the right amount of CPUs and you have the right amount of RAM, and of course, like we've talked about this whole time, fast enough storage for the catalog volume, then there really isn't a problem here. If we look at my example right here, this is going to be nested virtualization. I've booted 5 machines on top of a nested instance in my home environment, which is by no way enterprise class servers, ran perfectly fine, didn't have any issues. So again, it's going to be, you know, really the hardware, you know, if you're using old stuff that you had laying around and you're repurposing it, just expect that kind of performance out of it. Where if you're using newer, better gear, then that's going to work. Now, what you might want to do is actually jump over to infrascale.com and fill out that DRAS sizing appliance. Even if you're going to use a virtual appliance, it kind of asks all the right questions to make sure that you have the resources on that virtual appliance to be able to deploy it and have it run successfully. Plus, it's going to send it over to us, and we're more than happy to help you with sizing out what you should do in your virtual appliance, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, or what you guys are going to do with those virtual appliances. Now, ideally, what's great about having a physical appliance is it's extra hardware. You're not taking up resources from your production environment and moving it into your virtual, or eating them up for your disaster recovery, for your backups. Another thing, what if your ESX host dies? What if actually the ESX host goes down? Well, if you're using the physical appliance, we can fail over those machines to our physical appliance, which has extra resources for you. Now, I do see that we're running out of time. The last topic that I want to cover is I want to talk about zombie VMs. There's a phrase that was coined years ago. It's something that I think a lot of people overlook. So what a zombie VM is say that I have this great ESX environment, and it's clustered, and I have vMotion. So if a host dies, it's going to move those machines to another machine, and everything's good to go. Well, if the machine, the virtual machine, blue screen, that doesn't matter. You're just moving a blue screen VM from one host to another. It's still not going to answer those requests. It's still not going to, you know, be a functioning SQL environment or whatever application it was hosting. It's still a blue screen crashed environment. Well, that's where being able to boot up any machine from the last backup that you took is very important with us, right? We can fix that zombie VM situation. Shut down that zombie VM, power it off, power on the last known good copy that was backed up, you're back up and running. And then later, you know, off hours, we can troubleshoot that, we can figure out what's going on, but we don't have to take that outage, right? So just because you have a clustered VMware environment doesn't mean you're protected from user error or the zombie VMs where something might blue screen or the app might hang. So it's definitely worth it to have that ability to do the nested boot and to be able to do the off-host boot. Now, with the virtual appliance, we can do that nested boot, but with the physical appliance, might cost a little extra. We can add in extra hardware to be able to run stuff in case your virtual environment runs out of resources, crashes, dies, anything goes bad on that side of the house. Now, it does look like I've ate up all of the time. I don't currently see any additional questions. So thank you again for joining this Tech Thursday. We'll let you know when the next Tech Thursday is coming out. And hopefully everyone had a good time and learned a little bit